Just would like to let you know that we will start a couple of minutes late. We're still waiting for one of the speakers. And I would also like to make an announcement for all of our guests who are staying in Al Sharq or Sheraton hotels. There will be buses.
The French channel.
It is on.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today here at the Qatar National Library for this wonderful panel entitled Architecture as Face of a Nation. This panel is part of a larger program that Qatar Museums has organized in order to celebrate the opening of the National Museum of Qatar, which I hope that all of you will visit very soon. That is tomorrow. It is my honor and pleasure to introduce the moderator of this session, Mr. Philippe Jodidio, who is the author of more than 100 books on contemporary art and architecture. He was born in New Jersey in 1954 and studied economics and art history at Harvard University. He was the editor-in-chief of the leading French journal Art Monthly, Connaissance des Arts, for more than 20 years, from 1980 to 2002. He has published widely distributed monographs on architects such as I.M. Pei, Tadao Ando, Renzo Piano, Jean Nouvel, Zaha Hadid, David Chipperfield, and Shangri Ban. Philippe Jodidio works regularly with the Aga Khan Trust for Culture in Geneva on books about historic preservation of Muslim cities such as Cairo, Kabul, and more recently, Lahore. He has written books about the Museum of Islamic Art in Doha, the new architecture of Qatar, and has an upcoming volume on the National Museum of Qatar. He is currently also preparing a monograph on the Japanese architect Kengo Kuma. Please help me in welcoming Mr. Jodidio and the panel he will now introduce.
Hello. That's almost enough about me, but you came here today to see a remarkable group of architects. Your Excellency, I feel we're all very fortunate to be here. It's rare that several of the most important and inventive architects in the world gather in one place to build and today to speak of a significant shared theme. We're here to ask if architecture, particularly for cultural institutions, can be a face of a nation such as Qatar. I would, however, state the question differently. This was the theme that we were given, architecture as a face of a nation. And I believe that architecture can express not just the face of the nation, but its essence perhaps as well. Rather than speaking about appearance, maybe we can speak about the body and the soul. Exceptional architecture usually begins with enlightened patrons, those who define the projects and ultimately call on the architects. His Highness the Emir of Qatar, and before him the Father Emir, Her Highness Sheikha Moza, chairperson of the Qatar Foundation, and Her Excellency Sheikha Al Mayasa, who is here today, chairperson of Qatar Museums, have been at the nexus of this process. Where cultural institutions are concerned, a first emblematic building led the way in Qatar in 2008, the Museum of Islamic Art by I.M. Pei, who sought in his own words to identify the essence of Islamic architecture in his modern design, thus affirming the Islamic identity of Qatar and creating a splendid showcase for objects from across the region. Today, the National Museum of Qatar, inspired by the forms of the desert rose, opens, and its architect, Jean Nouvel, is with us. We are in the National Library of Qatar, another symbolic and open institution given form by Rem Koolhaas, who is also here. Jacques Herzog, Ben van Berkel, and Ibrahim Jeddah also have worked on cultural projects in Qatar. In time and space, with these architects, we are at the heart of one of the most significant efforts in the world to show the best architecture, to allow the best architecture to embody and perhaps even to define the best of a nation. I would suggest that the face of the nation is becoming visible with all of these projects together, not any one alone. I've spent the best part of the past 40 years attempting to explain contemporary architecture to the general public because I am convinced that architecture matters. It is not something that we simply have to accept as a fait accompli. Architecture lives and breathes with its users. And yes, at its best, it embodies a spirit. It goes beyond a specific use to become symbolic, defining a time and a place. It is more than a face. It is ideally, and perhaps today in Qatar, already an expression of the essence of a nation. The fundamental importance to look at architecture, to feel it, and to form opinions and feelings. The architects gathered here express their own ideas and ways of looking, but they are also interpreters of what you, the public, wants and needs. Be interested in architecture, look around you, be informed. This is where we live and think and dream. What I would like to do is ask each of the architects present one or two questions, and I hope that we will also have some dialogue, and I hope at the end some time for a few questions. I'd like to start, as we're in the National Library of Qatar, with Mr. Koolhaas, if I may. We spoke yesterday, and you told me that you had organized an exhibition in the National Museum called Making Doha. You referred to the seriousness of the projects undertaken in Qatar, to the importance given to education, for example. You referred to the near absence of commercial developers in the country and to the country's ambitious goals. Is this, perhaps more than any one building or even group of buildings, the real face of the nation today?
Well, we have been kind of working on an exhibition on the building of Doha in the last 70 years. And basically doing that, we kind of realized that what you're seeing now and the kind of event you're attending now is not a new thing, but that Doha actually, for a very long time and in a very methodical way, has been constructing new itself, inventing itself, used architecture to articulate what it is about. I think it is not a work only of European architects, not foreign architects. We're lucky that you're here. We were really struck by how, from the very beginning, Doha has been conceived by an international coalition of Japanese, Asian, Egyptian, European, American architecture, really a global kind of selection, and how it is a collective effort. Therefore, I'm kind of vaguely uncomfortable with the way in which, and that is true for maybe many architects, there is a constant obsession with architects as individual cases, unique cases, producing unique work. What I would like to explore, or what we have explored in this exhibition, is how we, all architects together, can really construct the basis for a country to work and to operate.
Do you find that this idea of the face of a nation is an appropriate one, and is it a subjective idea, and thus a matter of personal interpretation when you design a building, or are some ideas like the very openness of this national library simply part of what modern Qatar is? Are you expressing something that is already there?
I think that an architect today doesn't kind of really work in terms of starting with a metaphor and kind of realizing that metaphor. Architecture is a kind of totally interactive work where you begin with a commission. You have nothing to do with the commission. The commission is defined by somebody else. And then you meet clients on your path, and you meet representatives or client in your path. So the entire effort is totally interactive and kind of part of a dialogue. And in the dialogue, kind of many new things are injected, not by you, but by the other side. For instance, here, the idea of having a kind of library for antique books was an afterthought, and even the whole idea of declaring this library the National Library was an afterthought. So what is interesting in Qatar and what is very different from other places is that this is a construction site, not only in terms of buildings, but also in terms of a society. It's a construction site of a society that invents itself as it goes along. And so it is kind of pretty rare that you can participate as an architect in such a construction site. But I want to emphasize that it is a totally dialectical and dialogue-based effort.
So in some sense, it is possible for the new architecture, which you have participated in, to help to create a new vision of what the country is? Or do you feel that you talked about this dialogue that goes on, of course. Are you then ultimately expressing something that is already here, or are you, as an architect, also bringing something?
I think it's very important. Yes, it is new, but it is also a construction site already for 50 years, a long time. So I want to emphasize that we were not the first here. There was a kind of plan, there was a master plan, there were architects before. There was a kind of vision of what this place should be. So it is not that we kind of were parachuted in a kind of desert. It's far from a desert, and it's a kind of very methodical effort to work. I think that what maybe this is the last thing I can add, but I find in retrospect really and personally very kind of important. Yes, maybe we were helping to construct a new Qatar, but Qatar was also helping us, or helping me, to be relevant. You know that there is a kind of dreadful word, star architects, that kind of basically implies that we do the same thing more or less everywhere and that we don't care. Basically, by being in this situation, working on something that was really necessary and really wanted and really needed, with a population and with kind of representatives who were extremely critical, articulating what they needed. It helped us also to be constructive in a way that you rarely are in an architectural career today.
I'd like to address the next question to Jean Nouvel, since today is the day when the National Museum of Qatar will be inaugurated, and we have the honor of having him with us this afternoon. I know you've been asked a lot about this image of the desert rose, but when you selected the desert rose, were you seeking an element that was fundamentally part of the identity of Qatar? And if so, why a geological image as opposed to a cultural one?
When I did this choice, my first question that was, what is the meaning of a national museum? What would have an exigence for this kind of program? Was a question of symbol, that was a question of character, of dignity. When you look at what are the national museums in the countries around the world, old countries, for example, Europe, in America, very often national museums are in existing buildings, in historical buildings. They give automatically reference to a very noble building, generally with masterpiece of architecture in Paris, for example. And when you have to create a national museum, you have to need to have in the brain all the structure of what is a national museum. When I have to build this building on the site, Corniche, on the site of the royal family, that was the ideal site to talk about the symbol of the Qatar, like the meeting of the desert and the peninsula of sand with a sea around. It's a very rare desert in this condition. So I wanted to give the symbol linked to the eternity of the desert, and at the same time to the dynamism, to the modernism of the Qatar of today. And, I have in the brain the research of an architecture linked to the desert. With nomadism, it's easy, it's a tent. But for a permanent architecture, what is that? And the desert rose is invented by millenniums and winds. So it's a very characteristic typology, symbol of durability, also very old, solid. And at the same time, it's a new typology of space.
Entirely.
Because never you saw intersection of blades like this in a random system with proportion you cannot imagine. And when you have a combination between this reference to the desert and at the same time to the out of scale, I propose to have a translation between a sand rose of this dimension on 350 meters long. This time, at this moment, it becomes something very heroic on the scientific, technical point of view. How to build that. How to build that and to give the character and the symbolism of the building. So in the same time, you have these two main characteristics of what could be a national museum. Because we talk about the two main questions, the continuity with the old history and the presence of the modernity of today.
You have also included the former palace, the old palace it is called today, within this architecture, which is essentially geological. Isn't that a bit of a contradiction to have the geological meeting the old building in the heart of the museum?
Yes, that was a gift that to have that on the side, because that was the ideal situation to give an homage. And the new architecture arrived to show the castle by contrast, and to also arrive with dignity all around. You don't touch it. Very close. It's not in a corner. It's a composition around the historical palace. And the contrast between the historical palace and the architecture, abstract and geometrical architecture of the Sand Rose, something is emotional in this collage. And it's not a collage, it's a composition. And for this reason, when you're on the Corniche or in the sea, the profile of the Sand Rose go very low. And after you can walk above the disc, but in the middle of this break, you can see, you frame exactly the old palace.
Obviously, this National Museum is meant to incarnate, in some sense, an identity, the identity of Qatar. Would you say that the building itself is a face of a nation, since that's the subject that we're asked to talk about? Or is it only an expression of the specific issues concerned by a national museum? Is it a face of Qatar?
The face of the nation is what I explained. It's not the detail of the Sand Rose. It's not the character of the Sand Rose itself. It's a symbol of the Sand Rose for the country, for the desert. And at the same time, is this energy, is this modernity in the same time. The two advantages at the same time could be the face.
These are the qualities that you feel are the qualities of the country that you have placed in your building.
Spirit of the country.
These are qualities of Qatar, the energy, the ancient forms of geology, and you have brought these types of expression together in one place. So you have created, in a sense, a face of the nation. Yes. Okay, thank you. I'd like to ask the next question of Jacques Herzog, who's sitting next to me. I know that you're working on a new museum in Lusail, and I took a bit of the description of that museum that I was sent. You say this is a museum of Orientalist art. The building plan takes the form of a circle that conveys both universal meaning and a specific response to the building traditions of the Middle East and Doha. You reference architectural types such as the dome or the souk. And now the question is the goal here to be universal, regional, or specific to Qatar? And can one building be all of these things at once?
First of all, I want to try to define what is a building is always the result of a relationship between the client and the architect. And I think there are different attempts all over the world, not only nations but also companies, to use architecture to create part of their identity. So this is not in itself something new. But each attempt is different. And what I find extraordinary here in Qatar is that the architects that were selected are, let's say, of course, well-known architects, star architects or whatever, but all of them I found interesting in that they are looking for this dialogue. So nobody comes and says, this is the National Museum and this is the national identity, or this library is exactly your identity, because you couldn't do this, and we also don't do this. I think it's important that this dialogue, as it goes on, is what the architecture ultimately is. Of course, the architect makes this contribution based on his experience and his also obsessions, etc., etc. But what makes it so interesting is the result that finally has something very psychological. As a city is built over many years, decades, centuries, and expresses, let's say, the psychological state of a society in a given context. And I think from that point of view, Qatar is making important steps. If I look at this building, which is very open, this is an amazing statement in this world. But other buildings have tried to find another way, like Jean's building that we will see today, which gives another aspect of that same culture, of that same identity. And our project, which will be shown today, will again try to find another approach to the same question, to build a nation or to make a society, a contemporary society, which opens up itself towards the world. And because our building is on the ocean line, is on an island, we find it very interesting that Qatar, the land and the sea are facing each other, not in a determined way, but is constantly shifting between land and sea, is an unstable condition. And our building wanted to be a piece of architecture, but at the same time also a piece of land. So we decided to take this shape of something which has like a planet, like a specific piece of land. So we found this argument as an important one in this specific location, which is very different from this location or from the location of the National Museum. So it's to do with this specific condition on the seashore, on the line between water and land. That was our major input before we continued to develop the project over time.
In terms of the specific identity of Qatar, you have brought in other elements. This is a museum of Orientalist art, which very often is a view of the Middle East as it is seen by foreigners, Europeans very often. Is this nonetheless something that represents the face of this country and not an interpretation that is brought from the outside?
Well, it's both. You cannot avoid being influenced by architecture from, you know, all cultures, and we have been very much impressed by the last 1,000 years of Muslim architecture all over the world, whether it's Syria or Egypt or Istanbul or other places. So inevitably, we are influenced by all these things, and so our look into Qatar is also influenced by that look. So if you like to see it this way, the building that we do for the Orientalist Museum is in itself a piece of Orientalist architecture, whatever you do.
And that then becomes part of the identity of this place, of this country.
Yes, and that's how culture has happened, I guess, over the centuries. It's not just a one-way to go, but it's always back and forth. Muslim architecture has been very much inspired by older Indian and Persian architectures, and also from antique Roman Greek architecture. So there was never just one culture which was dominating and dictating where architecture should go. So it was always this kind of hybrid situation which created beauty.
Granted, but is there not some specificity in Qatar that your building expresses? You talked of the site, the form, a natural form in some sense. So that is what is specific to Qatar.
I think what makes it specific is this situation between land and water. I think that is very different. I try to explain that. I live in Switzerland. Switzerland is perhaps the most opposite geological situation, because in Switzerland you are on a piece of land which you believe this has been here forever, is rock and stone, and you're far away from the sea. And here you are in this situation between the line, the coastline, which is shifting and is undulating, and always between different statuses. And that makes it so interesting for us to do something here, which is a totally different condition from Switzerland.
I understand.
And
yes.
so I believe every place has a specific difference, and that is what makes architecture interesting.
Ben van Berkel, you're known for very modern designs, for what I would call flowing lines that speak a language of the age of the computer. You've worked on stations for the metro network here in Doha, I know. You're also working on a cultural project which you're not fully at liberty to discuss in a specific way. But in more general terms, can you explain how you have sought to interpret the specific circumstances of Qatar in the work that you're doing here? Are you seeking to bring out inherent qualities, things that exist here, or are you imagining the future face of a nation?
Yeah, yes, both, I think. I'd like to pick up also some of the former discussions, the topics who are mentioned. The beauties of this place is, of course, that it has an history, but it has an history what is quite spectacularly grown over the last 10 years, particularly. In 2000, for instance, we had here not maybe yet even 1 million people living here. Now we are close to 3 million citizens already in this place. So it is an incredible, fast-growing place with a beautiful history. So I like to refer back to that history on the one hand. But I like that idea that we also bring our own history as architects. We maybe with more than 30 years experience, maybe with work we have done, we have been maybe in more than 20 countries active, and we have learned, like maybe what was said also about the history of architecture. from maybe Asian architecture towards Muslim architecture towards Western architecture. We can almost not talk about it anymore in our position because we luckily enough, learned so much from a global experience. So that's maybe what we can bring to every new location. Our own history, that we look at the history of, for instance, Qatar, whereby I was interested in how in former courtyards people would gather together and let's say not only the house would have the courtyard, but the villages would have also courtyards where families would become there together. So that idea of the social, the almost the invisible aspect of architecture was something where I was inspired by also when we designed, for instance, also the metro stations, because there the ambition was to get more people into the street, to make sure that one would meet in the stations and that you would be able to shake a hand with someone you know. Whereas right now that is not the case. I mean, it's very difficult when you travel around in the city that you meet people. And similarly, we look at the same kind of ideas for this new project where we are working on. But of course, I like to also predict with all of the citizens here and maybe with other architects to think about what is this future of the city going to be like in 10 years' time, 20 years' time. I find it fascinating. Can we learn from not only the history, but also the recent history?
Perhaps more than the other architects who've spoken, you are placing an emphasis on values which are quite international, I find. The conviviality, of course, which exists everywhere. Are you pleading in favor of a kind of architecture that knows no boundaries? In terms of this debate, a face of a nation, it's rather vague. I'll grant you that. Is that word, a face of the nation, something that you can accept? Is it, or are we talking about architecture which takes all of its influences and is international?
I myself have not such a problem with the idea of the face, because I mean, look at the face. I think we can produce close to 5,000 expressions in the face. You know, I mean, so I like that idea that you could create not one image. I think that was the problem for many years, that architects were asked to produce one-off images, an icon building or whatever, you know. And I've never believed in that idea that you can produce a one-off image, like the face. The face is having many faces, many expressions, many after images. Rem talked about afterthoughts. I think the most important is, like with reading a good book, that you have a good afterthought and that you go back to the book. And that I know that it is happening, for instance, with this building, and I'm sure that will happen with some of the buildings we are going to see more in Qatar, that it are places with after images and afterthoughts.
But again,
like the face.
If I press you, though, the face of this nation, that's not exactly the debate, a face of a nation. This place has many different things. It has this meeting of the desert and the sea, which others talked about. I'm not sensing that attachment to something very specific in Qatar in what you say. Am I wrong? Am I not seeing something that...
I think that of course, I mean, what I said is that you can look at the history and the face of the nation in the way how it is connected to the physicality of the things you can read in the nation. Let's say that, but like what I said, you can also look at the social aspect or the what I said about also the expression of the face and how you communicate with the face. Is that what I find more important? So it's not the physical alone, but it is also the invisible aspect of that what the nation produces. And I think it is an intertwining of these two hybrids, what you could combine.
What about, we haven't spoken at all about materials. What about the materials that you use? I find that Jean Nouvel has made a very specific choice with these discs related to the desert rose, but also to let them weather as they may. The sand will come. They will become sandier than they are, I'm sure. But that is a decision that is a material decision and a formal decision vis-a-vis the desert, if you want, vis-a-vis this place. Are materials specific to Qatar, to this region, something that...
Yes, of course. I mean, maybe I can't talk about it so much because you cannot see the projects yet. But I, for instance, I mean, I've been interested in the history of tiles, you know, and tile making, for instance, or...
As in Holland?
Yes, in Holland. So I, you know, you can see a lot of tile work in the future of the stations, for instance, as one of the examples.
Okay. Now we're going to come to a different part of the conversation, but much the same one as well, with Ibrahim Jeddah, who has done us the honor of being here today, and who is, of course, from Qatar. You were the author of an important book on the history of Qatar, and you have, with wonderful drawings of the old buildings that have existed here. You've worked on major cultural projects, such as the Fire Station Art Center in Doha. I have to ask you, how do you feel about so many foreign architects coming to design very important buildings in your country?
Other than it's a great honor to be around them, I think our identity, because we're speaking about an identity, how our nation is being reflected. Early in my career, when I came back, graduated from the States, identity was defined as what we see of the older buildings around us. And this was sort of defined as an identity. And I think by the mid-90s, when Doha has moved into a sort of a cultural movement, not only in the architecture, but in the musicals and the arts, we started seeing a transition. And when such genius architects started coming, we sort of, especially for me, started redefining what is identity. Who can say that the desert rose is not our identity? It is as ancient and more ancient before our existence. This contemporary building responds to environment is an identity. And now the sun is almost at its peak. No glare, beautiful sun. That's a response to the surrounding and to the identity. When you're describing the relationship of the sea and the land, that's an identity. And I think this will give the grounds, because at the beginning, when we start seeing identity as the old vernacular buildings, it started being like chains holding you into something fixed. Now we're redefining identity, and I think this is the beauty of having such genius architects working here, and this is going to put the ground for the younger architects which are around us here, that to explore identity and to redefine identity other than a facade of a building, but a feeling. The shape of our sand is an identity. The color of our sea is an identity. And like Rem said, the surrounding, how it was influencing when you design a building is an identity. So it's really exciting. Histories of any nation go through stages. For us, it was, I have defined them as pre-oil period, beginning of oil period, with a small transition, and then there was a halt into the progress of that vernacular architecture. So this will help us jump faster into developing, you know, Gothic, Renaissance, Bauhaus movements. That was a transition. Here, I think this have helped speed up this transition and giving a ground to the young talents into sort of defining what I hope to see, which I'm seeing evolve, a contemporary Qatari architecture, influenced by the best materials, best stories to tell about our face of a nation.
When you work, you speak very often of combining modernity and Islamic architecture, or ideas that come from Islam. This is a subject which we have not evoked. I know that all of the architects present are involved and aware of that, involved with and aware of that theme. But do you feel that this Islamic identity may be lost to some extent as Qatar progresses into the future? I mean, I'm speaking not of the people and the country, but of the architecture. How is that Islamic identity today being conserved or put into the modern era, in your opinion, in for example, in your own work, but also in the work of those present? Is that identity present, or is it a problem that it isn't? I'm pressing intentionally a little bit further than I need to.
Wonderful question. You see, Islamic identity, again, let's not be sort of forced into thinking of the aesthetics. Identity, or Islamic identity, is a function. I've seen a mosque in China and one in Spain, and all in between, all translated into a function. This morning I was in Musharraf in one of the museums with Al Jazeera, and we were talking about a courtyard and the transition from the entrance into the courtyard, into the house, is a behavior. This could be so contemporary or vernacular. That's the identity of the function and respect of the spaces and the transition of spaces. So, see, I used to tend to get locked in this box of the aesthetics. I think identity is way beyond than aesthetics.
But with all of this new construction, I mean, there's an enormous amount here, clearly. Without referring to Islam, perhaps, is not a specificity of this place being lost with modern architecture, whether it come from very talented architects such as those present, or others, large international firms that are building as well? Isn't Qatar becoming a bit like any other place? I'm insisting intentionally. I don't feel that way myself.
We almost slipped into the loss of identity early in the 80s as things started booming. Until His Highness the Emir Father, 90s, there was sort of, let's define identity. And it was never too late. So there was a big comeback to the vernacular in its own manner, the way I have redefined it at a certain stage. And then the movement of the new architecture that reflects. IMP, when he did the Louvre extension, it was a glass pyramid, which fits quite well in the context of France and the contrast. But when IMP was challenged to do something that suits us, he sort of developed something that really relates to the environment, not in terms of aesthetics, but again, going to this Islamic architecture, the courtyard feeling. So I think it's not too late. We are there. Our identity has become, I love the definition of coming from our roots, yet the sky is our limit on how to reinterrupt our own identity.
Rem Koolhaas, when we spoke. When we spoke yesterday about this talk, you insisted on the fact that it is rare for architects such as yourself to be in the presence of clients in an environment that really requires, that offers you an opportunity to be extremely serious. I wonder if you could elaborate on that idea of seriousness, which I found very interesting and somewhat abstract, but interesting.
It's not really that you rarely encounter clients that enable you to be serious, but you rarely encounter issues that are very serious. And that is, I think, what is exciting for us here. We are not operating in a society where there are already many museums, there are already many libraries that are already more or less finished, that have a kind of extremely long history. We're operating in a kind of field where there is basically newness, where there is an interest in newness, where there is an interest in experiment, where there's an interest in experimenting. And I think that all of that is kind of what enables us to mobilize more of our, let's say, total interest than in more narrow conditions or more familiar conditions, maybe.
We spoke about another point, and I believe you don't quite agree with what I said, but there is a project that existed for the Corniche that Arata Isozaki designed for a national library. It was a massive building up on 3 very large pillars, very visible, obviously, in that location. You have designed the National Library here, since the other one was canceled. You have designed a building that is low to the ground, that is extremely open, that isn't set up in the air. When we talk about the face of a nation, a national library is very important. So these are 2 different interpretations of the same problem. A national library, visible, high, massive, and another one open, low, and also outside of the city, but that's perhaps not your choice. Is the face of a nation to a great extent a question of the period that we're in, because Isozaki designed his in 2005 and yours later, although I know you started quite soon after that. Is it a question of the architect, the time that we're in? Why can the face of a nation be so different as it expresses?
I propose that we drop the face of the nation discussion. I think that you've heard all of us kind of resist that or explain that we're not interested in articulating the face of the nation. We are individuals with individual talents, and we encounter a nation, and basically out of that encounter, new things in the right situation, new things are born. And I think that in the exhibition we're showing a kind of project by Arata Isozaki for a library, but that project is totally related to the history and biography of Arata Isozaki, who in the late 50s and early 60s kind of was reinventing Tokyo, reinventing kind of what Asia could be, and who maybe 20 years later was in a kind of situation here where he could maybe realize something that he had invented before. So what this shows is how unbelievably rich kind of certain histories can be. You know, this library kind of began as a kind of project in Tokyo, transplanted to here, first on stilts, then kind of landing. I think there has to be kind of really an interest in the whole story rather than the kind of end product.
Rather than
and I think that is, particularly in architecture today, a really crucial thing, to look at the whole story and not at these kind of finished products.
Or the images, just the image, because what we see on Instagram and elsewhere. Jacques Herzog, I would like to ask you about your approach to materials in terms of this location, the desert, and you spoke about the location of your new museum, but is there any reflection that you have had on the materials that you employ and how they weather, if you want, in this sometimes harsh environment?
Indeed, I spoke about land and water as a main topic, and inertia, which is certainly dealing with this very specific weather conditions and the heat that at some times of the year is really very extreme. So we found the most obvious material interesting, which is sand. And we try to work with sand and earth and concrete in some kind of mixture that we are mocking up, and try to find a way to use it, which then, of course, can weather and can transform itself as it will.
Jean Nouvel, I know that you designed, you designed an earlier form for the National Museum of Qatar, which was to be underground. This hasn't been publicized very much, but I know because you've spoken to me that it existed. The desert rose is also something that we find underground. Is there any specific reason for which, in this circumstance, you preferred elements that had to do with what is underground in Qatar, in this location?
Just one or two sentences on this question, because I want to talk the general idea also, about the general ideas. No, initially I thought that was a good site to talk in the obvious way about the meeting of the sea and the desert. And I wanted to keep the desert, the sea, and the royal castle, with a very strong accentuation of every element. But that was not an iconic building. And perhaps for an art building, that was better, and we changed that. But what I think when I listen to that, everybody now, every city, every architect, every people lose identity. We are all losers. All the cities are losers, all the architects are losers, all countries are losers in the way of the identity linked to the architecture of urban planning. And when you begin without a strong, ancient identity, strong, I talk about the quantity also and the quality. For a nomad country is more difficult to do. More this identity is anchored. But now we are in a situation, we talk a lot of time about architecture without architect. Now we have to talk about architect without architecture. Because now you have all the corporate architect, all the engineering company, all the computers doing the same building all around the world. In 2 days you change all the parameters and you touch the fees. And that is the world of today. And we talk about the faces of the architect, of the countries, of the city. We cannot talk about that. We have to talk about the identity of the culture, the identity of the art of architecture, the identity of the art of the life in the cities. They are all the same, more and more every day. I am against the clonage, I am against this world, and I fight for the identity linked to the culture and to the invention linked to the culture of these people in different sites, in different history, in different geographies.
Thank you very much. That's
Well
clear.
said.
You spoke about the urban issue and the lack of planning, which happens. It's perhaps not as severe here as it may be in other places. But we are in the midst of a campus which was planned originally by Arata Isozaki, and it is a collection of buildings by well-known architects for the most part. Is this something that has worked? I suppose I should address the question to Rem Koolhaas because we are sitting in his building in Education City. Has the idea of a new urban planned zone with architects from all over the world, do you feel that it's worked out well here?
I think that Suzuki planned a context, and that context by kind of through maybe 20 years, and a number of very diverse but intelligent architects has been kind of really reinforced and is actually working as a quarter of universities the way it was intended.
A quarter, I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
A quarter of universities,
Yeah,
the way it was intended, as a kind of
neighborhood,
intellectual, basically as a campus.
Yeah, but architecturally speaking then, you don't want to address that, because it is a collection of very different buildings, there is an order, but is this, I know you don't like the theme of the talk, but is this kind of a way of expressing the nation that is
No,
that is
I
valid?
really dislike it, this theme. I think we should stop it, and I think that what I see, and kind of maybe this is very kind of original, I see a highly coherent, well-planned, constructive environment. And I think that is in itself, so I'm not looking for a masterpiece, I'm looking for a quarter where basically a number of buildings is kind of mutually reinforcing and has a positive influence on each other. That is what I see.
That's very good, understood. I'll try not to use the word, I see it above me, that's why I keep referring to it. Ibrahim Jeddah, do you, now, we've heard expressions of the fact that that architecture is becoming more and more global, that there are ways in which these architects and many others, yourself included, fight against that and make things which are of a place in many ways. Do you find that Qatar should have its own specific identity, where contemporary architecture is concerned, or are we going to be happy, which we can be, with everything that's being built separately?
Well, I think the contrast is the new sort of identity. If we had redundancy and repetition, it wouldn't work as we are progressing. But just slightly to divert, Philip, we've spoken about the architects and an influence and the planners. Now, we definitely have lost our identity in terms of the planning. Our houses, when the oil came, were beautiful courtyard houses, and now we ended up, some planner came and decided we're going to have cul-de-sacs and grids, and we ended up on boxes called villas. And this is where we definitely have lost the identity in terms of the dwelling. But in terms of public buildings, the public surroundings, I think this contrast is making our new, definitely our wonderful new identity, which we are extremely proud of. We see this not only reflected in the architecture, by the way. Our arts, our contemporary arts movement is also reflecting this in a beautiful way. The way we take from our calligraphy into contemporary, from even our musicals is going through this.
In a way that is specific to Qatar.
And in a way, it's specific. As we are evolving to a more modern nation, we continue to evolve like any other nation in the world.
I was asked to leave time at the end of this conversation for questions from the audience, but I would like to ask you, gentlemen, if you have anything else to say about the subject or the non-subject that we're dealing with today, if you feel that we have not said things that need to be said.
But I think that this issue of identity is the title of an exhibition, but I think it's there are many ways to explain in a more subtle way what really happens, in the society. The role of architecture is, because whatever you do, somehow you cannot avoid be part of that identity because it's here. So I think the discussion should start now if you want to come closer to what actually is happening and what is the future of architecture and urbanism and how this is changing over time. I think that, in fact, the discussion could only start.
That the future of architecture and urbanism clearly goes well beyond this specific place. But here, there have been many efforts which are of interest. It's one of the places where there's the most construction in the world. So it is one of the laboratories, if you want, of this future, perhaps.
Yeah, it's a very specific situation because it's in the hands of relatively few people. And I can only repeat what has been said. It's a remarkable far. But it's not a model for the world, which is the only one that you could repeat over time.
Clearly not. It's quite different, in fact. Yes. Yeah. Ben, do you have any other comment on the subject, on this question of an identity?
No, I mean, I think we more or less showed all of us already a form of uncomfortable relation towards it, because identities change over time, and especially in urban
many
planning.
Faces, as you said.
Yeah. So think of the many faces.
I believe we can open to questions. If I'm not sure, somebody must have a microphone. I don't know where that person is. Is there? I can offer this one if not. Are there any questions, please? There's a lady here.
We have an extra microphone here.
Yes, maybe first of all, I would like to comment on the courtyard, because I see many courtyards now inside of big buildings like this one here. So maybe it's not that you just meet in the family, but you meet and still have your courtyard in Qatar. Second, maybe I have a question. What is your advice to a young male or female architect from Qatar, where to build and where to try to develop their architecture? Should they first go outside the country, as they might not get the chance to build something here? Or what is your advice that they will have the chance to also develop their architecture here in Qatar?
Ibrahim?
For a young architect, I wouldn't rather be anywhere else in the world than here, because you could see your dreams come true faster. Buildings can evolve quite fast. What do I advise them? Well, I studied abroad. I lived in the States for many years. But now, fortunately, the School of Architecture have professors, the best professors from all over the world, teaching them here within the context. So it's an exciting period for them. And now they get to get influenced by the best in the world. I mean, what a joy. I wish I was there at that time.
You are here. You are here.
I'm here. No, but if I had such an opportunity at their age, you know, imagine you're in college and you sit with the greatest and you see the best architecture that is evolving within the world. It's an exciting period.
The question also concerned women. We have a group of men. Do you feel that in Qatar things are opening for women now in architecture?
I have to say something. This project is kind of really the result of an interaction with kind of maybe at least 20 extremely emancipated, critical, well-educated Qatari women that were kind of responsible together to make this happen.
I think the architectural scene in Qatar is going to be led by lady architects, for sure, yeah. Honestly.
And also I think the question, it's good for everybody, wherever you live, that you go out and you find your way, and then eventually come back. So I think this is not different.
Was that a comment about the new architecture here, a lack of courtyards? Is that what you meant? No. There are courtyards. So
I think she means that the courtyard mutates from a kind of residential to a kind of collective thing. And that therefore it's not that, but that it takes different forms all the time.
Are there other questions? I see there are some hands.
I have a question.
Oh, yes, okay.
What do you have as advice for us architecture students in terms of finding our identity while like staying true to our culture? And like in like our design studios, we have like certain like projects or like conditions to meet, but like we're trying to find our own style, our own identity. Like, what advice do you have as a practicing professional architect?
That's a difficult one. Ben.
Yeah, you know, of course, I mean, you whenever you are asked to design a house or a museum as a student, make sure you develop your own talent and your own visions, you know, I mean, we are all teaching, I know, and lately my students organize me. You know, they tell me what they like to do for research, and I supervise them. So I mean, yeah, develop your own brief.
Another question? I saw several hands before.
Hi, for Mr. Nouvel, it's such an honor to have you here. I wanted to know which was your favorite part of designing the new museum that's opening tomorrow. Was it the exterior or the interior? Thank you so much.
I apologize, but I never do this kind of choice. Inside and outside, for me, it's a total continuity. And the stand rose, you can feel that inside. When I talk about intersection of blades, these intersections of blades are inside and outside. And an architecture is a proposal, an intellectual proposal. You can do the choice to have a different outside and inside, but it's an architecture and one decision. But generally, outside and inside has to work together. Architecture is inside and outside. Perhaps a little bit more inside than outside. But we have to think to that also. Because now, with the evolution of the world, very often you do shell and core building. Only the facade and the core. And inside you put a lot of architect of interior, and everyone can do what he wants, but it's not an architecture, it's something to a kind of a city in the city. I don't know what is this, but it's not an architecture for me. And just one word also about identity. For me, identity is linked to intelligence, natural intelligence. And for other things, and intelligence and courage.
I have a question here. Hi, my name is Nancy and I'm a student at Qatar University. When we talk about identity, I think it's a discussion that goes in two ways. One, the past, one, the future. And personally, I think that the educational system is more stuck in the past. We're always analyzing the past instead of just focusing on what could be instead of what have been. I want an advice from you to the faculty members, not to the students, but to the faculty members regarding this issue. Thank you.
Can I comment on this, please? I'll comment to the young lady that asked about identity, the student, and where do we go. Forget about identity, enjoy it. You're a student. Forget about budgets. Copy what you like, explore what you like, throw the chains away. You get away with anything you want. Be creative. Forget about this that we're discussing. Enjoy life.
Okay, yeah, one more maybe.
Perfect, no.
No?
This is the perfect end, no?
Hi, can I pose a question over here on your left? Left, this side. Yeah, here.
Yes.
First of all, again, this is an extreme honor. I actually flew all the way from Kuwait to attend this and barely made it, but thank you for being late, John Nouvel. Otherwise, I wouldn't have made it. And in this race to do the contrast that we're saying, how much should we really preserve? Because I'm seeing it all over the GCC countries. We are losing a lot of our not just vernacular architecture, but even the architecture that took place in the modern period, the 20th, like especially in Kuwait, we've lost, some really important buildings that defined that moment at the time that were or was the identity that actually, showed the country at its best, especially Kuwait in the 20s. It was leading. So I'm afraid that this contrast that's taking place today, we might lose some of that. We should try to incorporate in the context, and I'd like to hear what you have to say since you've been here for quite some time.
That's addressed to me, okay. You see, we always think about our vernacular as the older buildings, and we keep forgetting that the 50s, the 60s, the 70s has evolved us. We tend to forget, at least in our part of the world, our early modern history has been totally ignored, has been knocked out. Until, unfortunately, Sheikha Mayasa had to go. I'm sure she's getting ready to open the museum today. But she started this preserving our early modern history, whether it's the old Diwan Amiri or the firehouse or many other older ministries and schools that are being preserved. So finally, our early modern history is a transition that has been documented and preserved. And I hope Kuwait will do this. I'm sure they are doing this.
I believe that will be the end of the talk. Thank you very much for your questions, for your patience.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, we destroy buildings of the 70s.